Number 11. Gary Edinger. In February of 2007, Gary Edinger suffered a gruesome accident in a remote portion of a Wisconsin forest. The self-employed logger and champion dog sled trainer tragically misjudged the balance of a maple tree he was cutting. It started to split vertically, and Edinger tried running to safety by jumping through the logs. The tree buckled, then fell swiftly and unpredictably. A shockwave surged through the man's entire body as the tree struck him. He remembered feeling no pain as it happened. Edinger tried to stand, but he toppled and found that his left leg had been severed clean off, right below the knee. Cell phone coverage was virtually inexistent, and he was at least 20 miles away from a town. Worse still, the temperature outside was an estimated minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Even though he'd lost a leg, Edinger managed to crawl back to his pickup truck and started driving towards a road. He made a 911 call and the emergency services intercepted him. The man was airlifted to a hospital. Edinger was eventually fitted with a prosthetic leg, which enabled him to resume logging, hunting, and many of the outdoor activities he loved. He chronicled his harrowing experience in the book Will to Live, a saga of survival. Number 10. Vehicle impaled on logs. On October the 11th of 2019, an unnamed Georgia driver had a brush with death when his vehicle was impaled on a bundle of logs. He was driving along the Cleveland Highway in Hutt when he bent over to pick up a cup of coffee. In doing so, his view of the road was obstructed, and he crashed into the back of a logging truck. Dozens of logs broke through his 2003 Nissan SUV, penetrating it from windshield to rear window in a scene reminiscent of that from the second Final Destination movie. The driver miraculously survived the accident. Since he wasn't sitting upright, he was protected when the logs impaled his car. One firefighter told a media outlet that it almost seemed like the gap had been created just for his head. Rescuers had to cut through as many as 40 logs of various thickness in order to save the man who'd become trapped inside the car. An official report on the incident claims that the driver escaped with only minor injuries. Number 9. Cody Anderson. For the past several years, from a statistical standpoint, logging has been the most dangerous job in the United States. In 2017 alone, data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics revealed that the death rate was roughly 98 per 100,000 loggers, which is a staggering 28 times higher than the all-worker rate. The dangers stem from a combination of heavy machinery and the trees, which may fall or roll unpredictably, thus causing lethal injuries. One such case occurred in 2020, when worker Cody Anderson was crushed to death by a log in Josephine County, Oregon. The 26-year-old had been sectioning logs with a chainsaw when one of them rolled down and pinned him roughly 800 feet on the side of a mountain. Paramedics and firefighters were called to the scene at around 11 a.m. The recovery operation took over 5 hours, but there was nothing more that could be done for Anderson, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. Number 8. Al Hill. In 2007, Lumberjack Al Hill was chopping down timber in a remote part of an Iowa forest about 60 miles northeast from Sacramento. One of the trees he'd cut down landed on his leg, and Hill was trapped for over 11 hours in the woods with no cell phone reception. The 66-year-old believed that the only way he could make it out of his dire predicament was to cut off his own leg. Hill took out his pocket knife and started cutting beneath the knee, through his muscles and tendons. After freeing himself, the man started screaming out in pain. That's when one of his neighbors heard him. He ran 2 miles out to call the emergency services and then, aided by another neighbor, loaded Hill into a pickup truck. The man was airlifted to a hospital where he underwent successful emergency surgery. The authorities were reportedly amazed that Hill hadn't gone into shock after severing off his limb, with the fire chiefs describing him as pretty remarkable. Number 7. Kathy Graves. In September of 2016, a Tennessee woman crashed her car into an 18-wheeler that was transporting logs. 48-year-old Kathy Graves was driving a small Mustang sports car when she collided with the logging truck. The impact tilted the cargo vehicle and broke the safety straps, causing the logs to roll onto Graves' Mustang and crush it under their massive weight. Amazingly, the woman survived the harrowing accident with only minor cuts and bruises. Graves would later tell a media outlet that she only had about an inch of space to breathe inside the car. Had the logs rolled further than that, the woman would have sustained potentially fatal crushing injuries. Number 6. Wilhelm. In 2017, Mal Wilhelm was left with severe injuries when the tree he felled for firewood changed direction and crushed him. The 52-year-old Australian man was struck by the falling tree and also sustained deep slashes from his chainsaw. He was lying in a pool of blood on his remote property, roughly 43 miles from Perth. It took paramedics 3 hours to reach him. During this time, Wilhelm could feel his lungs filling up with blood. He was taken to Royal Perth Hospital, where a special filter, which looked like a splayed safety pin, was inserted into his vein to stop blood clots from reaching his lungs. It saved the man's life, but he was still left with 2 broken legs, a fractured spine, and a crushed rib cage on what would be a long road to recovery. Number 5. Jeremy Tanaka. In July of 2015, forestry worker Jeremy Tanaka was killed in British Columbia after a massive tree fell on top of him. A 114-foot hemlock, which had been uprooted by a machine, landed on the unsuspecting worker, inflicting fatal damage. Tanaka was part of a multi-phase logging operation in which the machines were working above the fallers. It can be dangerous unless proper distance is kept, as the workers have only a hard hat and a high visibility vest as protection. The company Tanaka had worked for was fined over $73,000 for the safety failures that had contributed to the 38-year-old man's death. The managers and workers were reportedly unaware of the hazard clearance required by the machine being used. Number 4. Man crushed by a log. In June of 2014, a New Zealand man was crushed to death by a runaway log while doing maintenance work at a church in Wakefield. A few months prior to the accident, a large gum tree had fallen on the premises. The man and a colleague were on a hill as they cut the tree into sections. The worker was standing below a log when it started to roll down after coming loose. He tried to outrun it, but it was to no avail. Like a gigantic rolling pin, the wooden pillar crushed the man beneath its weight. He was taken to a hospital but later succumbed to his injuries. Number 3. John Hutt. In 2011, logger John Hutt was working alone in a woodland near Montrose, Colorado. He was attempting to retrieve a pile of fallen aspen trees when the 6-ton trailer of his truck slipped and pinned his right foot. 61-year-old Hutt screamed for help for over half an hour, but it soon became apparent that no one was going to hear him, as he was in a remote part of the forest. Whenever he tried to move his foot, the pain would only get worse. Hutt realized that he was likely to die before anyone found him. In a desperate bid to free himself, the logger used his blunt 3-inch knife and started cutting off his toes. The pain was excruciating, but Hutt knew he had to keep going before he went into shock. He amputated all 5 of the toes on his right foot and thus managed to free himself. He wrapped his bloody foot in a t-shirt and drove to a parking lot, where he was later picked up by ambulance. The man survived his ordeal, but the doctors were unable to reattach his toes. Today's topic was requested by Mickey Haynes, Eternal 420, Neve, and Kay. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Canadian Lumberjack. In October of 2017, an unnamed Canadian lumberjack was almost crushed to death by the tree he was cutting. The man, reported as working for a tree removal service, was halfway up a ladder and not wearing a safety harness. As he was cutting through with his chainsaw, the worker failed to properly judge the balance of the tree, which stood roughly 100 feet tall. It fell towards the lumberjack and one of the branches struck him on the head. He managed to grab the trunk and thus kept himself from plummeting to the ground. He wasn't reported as having sustained life-threatening injuries. A witness who'd been filming from afar noticed that the lumberjack had been cutting the tree the wrong way and could be heard saying that he was going to get hurt.
Official They Will Kill You merchandise is now available at theywillkillyou.com. Some of it is to die for.
Number 1. William Bart Colin Tuno. In September of 2013, helicopter pilot William Bart Colin Tuno was killed in a crash near Detroit Lake in Oregon. The 54-year-old man had starred in a season of History Channel's Axemen, in which he airlifted logs from the forest. Colin Tuno would use a cable measuring over 200 feet with a hook at its end to fly the felled trees to various sites. He was the only one inside the aircraft when the accident occurred. Colin Tuno was apparently aware of a problem with the helicopter as, according to witnesses, he'd released the logs before crashing. A rotor reportedly became separated from the aircraft prior to it collapsing upside down. Colin Tuno was pronounced dead at the scene. It's still unclear what had led to the malfunction, as the man had more than 25 years of experience as a pilot, having previously flown for the US Navy. Initial theories include mechanical failure or an overloading of the helicopter, which he described as an efficient, fast-logging machine. Thanks for watching. Would you rather work for a year on a crab fishing boat in the Bering Sea or as a lumberjack? Let us know in the comments section below.